Have you ever written a script entirely because something else pissed you off? Well, I have. I wrote a 72-page script because I watched the trailer for War of the Rohirrim and was just a little bummed out. War of the Rohirrim looked like it could have been actually totally great. I think there's skepticism from most people when anyone says, let's make more Lord of the Rings stuff, because the original Lord of the Rings movies were so singular, so special, and made under such crazy circumstances that it's hard to duplicate it. But when I saw they were doing animation, I realized, oh, there is a way they could do this, if they specifically tried to borrow from the Studio Ghibli school of storytelling. Studio Ghibli, in brief, is often called the Japanese Disney. They've been making animated movies for decades. They made stuff recently like The Wind Rises or The Boy and The Heron. They've won Oscars. They're very acclaimed. They're considered these massive, powerful, artistic movies. They're often guided by a common set of themes and mandates. And I realized Studio Ghibli, specifically, when it's doing high fantasy, fits very well into the Lord of the Rings milieu while still being unique. At its best, with something like Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind or Princess Mononoke, you have a high fantasy story that can be epic, that can be scary, that can be sad, that can be funny, that can have a sense of childlike wonder, but that can still feel like a powerful, coherent story held together by a few leads. And that is exactly what, at its best, Lord of the Rings is. What Lord of the Rings exactly is hard to define because people have their perception colored a lot by the movies or by just the books. When the truth is, people's idea of what Lord of the Rings is affected by both. But in, I think, more ways than they are aware of, they're really thinking of the movies when they think of Lord of the Rings and what makes it great. The challenge for any new property adapting Lord of the Rings would be to strike the balance between the books and the movies in terms of creating a story that is compelling, but creating one that still maintains the key themes of the original. I love Lord of the Rings, and I've read all the books, and I've read all the material. But even the greatest Lord of the Rings scholars have said many times on film that Lord of the Rings is great, but it doesn't always translate well to a film experience, to a storytelling experience even. That's not what it was made for, but people who care about the property have worked with it to make it more like that. And so I don't think we're disrespecting Lord of the Rings by trying to do this. We just have to be aware of what makes it special as a property and as a thing millions of people love, and try and transplant that. And that is what I did when I wrote the script. The source material for the movie is the appendices from Lord of the Rings, from Return of the King specifically. It's the story told in about 8, 9, 10 pages. It's the story of the Rohirrim and of the House of Errol, the first king of the Rohirrim. There's some disparate horse people, and then they come in and save the Gondorians from a bad army, and then they get given the land of Rohan and establish a kingdom and a royal family, and then they basically exist like that and have ups and downs, and then the story that is being used for the film specifically is the story of Helm Hammerhand, the Helm who gives his name to Helm's Deep. And what happens in that story over the course of 2 or 3 pages in the appendices is that Helm is a strong king, and then there is a lord from nearby who's maybe getting a bit mean and a bit aggressive, and he comes to a council of the king and talks some trash to him, and the king hits him once, and the guy dies, and then his son declares war, and then he succeeds at the war and drives most of Rohan into Helm's Deep, and Helm Hammerhand goes a little Simohaya and starts sneaking out at night to kill people in the snow, and then he eventually dies, and also his sons died during the course of the war, and then after that, his nephew goes out and manages to kill the son of the original lord and save the day. And then the Rohirrim go back and everything goes back to normal. So that's a pretty simple outline, but, we've got enough room for something interesting in there. It's a little King Lear, it's a little Macbeth, it's a little War and Peace. It's the story of a country getting invaded and someone who is not strictly at the top of the line to be the prince having to rise to the occasion, and the story of a king grieving his losses and the loss of his kingdom. So that works, and we're getting a version of that in the animated film that's come out now, but I was like, well, what if we tried to make it actually more in tone with the tone of the films? I've listened to the commentaries on all of the Lord of the Rings movies, for all of the creators for each movie. Each movie has 4 commentaries. One from the writers and director, one from the production designers, one from the cast, and one from the producers. These commentaries are also only found on the extended edition. Each extended edition is 3.5 hours, except for the last one, which is 4 hours. With 4 commentaries per movie, that's 12 hours for each of the first 2 movies, and 16 hours for the third movie. I've listened to them all. There are a lot of boring parts, but there are also a lot of parts where they describe the creative process and how they got to where they got to. And in ways, that's just scratching the surface of how production unfolded. But it's not nothing. So what I said was, let's combine what I know about the writing and production process from that, then combine it with the tone of Studio Ghibli, and specifically Princess Mononoke, because it both is closest in tone and setting to Lord of the Rings, and is also one of their very best works. And let's combine that and try and make a script for a film that does what the original Lord of the Rings did, and also does what Studio Ghibli does. And I think the result is pretty good. You can read it at the link in this description here. There wasn't really a lot of point to this. The movie is already out. They're not going to remake the same material anytime soon. This was mostly kind of an exercise for myself, really, to just see what would it be like. How could we work with this material? But I do think it is good, and I think people would get a lot out of reading it. Reading scripts isn't always hugely exciting because a lot of the stuff that people like about movies isn't in there yet. The music isn't in, the actors aren't in. But there's still a lot you might like. And for me, Lord of the Rings is about a lot of things, but one of the things it's about is about being fundamentally optimistic and fundamentally affirming both the values of strength and courage, but also the strength of empathy and of love and compassion. And that is what I think this script does. If you liked what I talked about, consider following me. Goodbye.